Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burek of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. Had him on in 2014. I really enjoyed my conversation with him. He is former president of the Mises Institute and associated scholar with the Johnson Center at Troy University, also former banker. Doug French, thank you for joining us again.
Pleasure to be back, Jason.
Now, Doug, for our listeners out there, some of them are just starting to wake up. You know, they see all this stuff on CNBC and Bloomberg, and they see the Keynesians on there like Paul Krugman or Nouriel Roubini or the talking heads who pretend to know some economics. And they say, oh, the stock market's rising, the housing market's doing well, the U.S. economy is doing well, and they try to cite fundamental reasons for the asset prices rising. What are some of the major differences, in your opinion, between the Austrian School of Economics, monetarism, and Keynesian economics?
Well, the Austrian school would, first of all, would see the rise in asset prices that you just mentioned to be just another form of inflation. That the Federal Reserve and its quadrupling of the bank, its balance sheet has created inflation in asset prices, which the central bank doesn't like to talk about. It contends that prices at the retail level for the average person is non-existent. There's no inflation. Prices are flat. We can argue about that all day, but that's what they would contend. But Austrians would say that when you manipulate interest rates low, and they have certainly manipulated them about as low as they can go, unless you go to the other side of the pond where they've manipulated them below zero, you are going to have effects that are detrimental in the long term to the economy, and one of those detrimental effects is creating boom conditions like we have in the stock market, like we have in the bond market that is finally starting to crack, and various other asset prices. Now, the Keynesians would view the economy as a single entity that can be manipulated by our wise central bankers. And so if things are bad, if there's a lack of aggregate demand, then they would say that the government needs to flood the market with money. It needs to create the government needs to have fiscal programs, whether they be cash for clunkers or whatever social programs you want to talk about. Even war would probably qualify to increase aggregate demand and bring prosperity. The monetarists would be somewhat in the middle, and again, they would be more friendly towards government certainly than the Austrians. But the monetarists a lot of times fall into this rational expectations camp where they think everybody participating in the market knows everything that's what's going on in the market. So you can't even have
efficient market hypothesis.
Efficient market hypothesis. So thank you. And so we can't have bubbles, according to the Eugene Famas of the world and Lucas and some of the others. And we know that's not true. These guys get proof virtually every day that their theory isn't true, but they stand by it and actually win Nobel Prizes. So sadly, the Austrians don't win any Nobel Prizes, and Keynesians do, like Paul Krugman and monetarist rational expectations guys like Eugene Fama do. So that leaves the Austrians to be shouting from the sidelines, probably to little effect on CNBC and Bloomberg, but it's a growing school with growing influence, and probably because of the efforts of Peter Schiff and people like him, and so more and more people are listening. And all it's going to take is the next crash that we have that will spur a whole new interest in another wave of interest in Austrian economics.
Yeah, also add the efforts of Ron Paul and the Mises Institute, which, you ran the Mises Institute. Putting all that content online was very smart. The Mises Institute, Austrian School of Economics, has had a nice renaissance, a rebirth, if you will. I took MBA classes after the 2009 crash, and my MBA school, my business school, didn't even have any Austrian School of Economics books in our library, and I'm sure there's, that holds true for many other business departments or libraries at universities and stuff like that. Probably there's very few Austrian School of Economics even in public libraries. It's probably very difficult to find those there as well.
No, it's very difficult to find Austrian in libraries and on mainstream campuses, but thankfully, as you mentioned, the Mises Institute has a bookstore online. Most of its books are free and in PDF form, and you can buy them very cheap in a e-reader form, and very inexpensive in the in the hardback and paperback version. So. And of course, Amazon has done wonders, and Google has done wonders for the Austrian School. I'd like to think that, Sergey Brin and his partner have probably done more for freedom than anybody else. And just the mere fact that you can Google this stuff, you can Google Murray Rothbard and get a million, notations and take it from there. And so, yeah, that's and you're right to mention the Ron Paul campaign, which really clued a lot of young people into Austrian economics and the whole freedom movement, and we'll see where it goes in 2016. But I think I've said this many times. There's maybe on Main Street, Austrian economics isn't well known. On Wall Street, it really is. We have a lot of fans on Wall Street, and amongst hedge fund managers and money managers. They may not come out of the closet. They may not tell everybody, but they're reading the zero hedges of the world and the doom, gloom, and boom report and things like that. They're paying attention to the Austrian School.
Yeah, I worked a couple jobs in the mainstream financial industry as both a stockbroker and an investment advisor rep, or IAR, and then also a regular investment analyst at a more mainstream firm. Used to be a libertarian firm, Investing Daily, but they changed over to more of a mainstream Keynesian firm, although they're not doing really well right now. They've been declining a lot in terms of, the size of the firm and sales and stuff. But yeah, it's exactly like what you said. I mean, it may be off the record, with some coworkers. You can bring up some Austrian School of Economics, and maybe you won't get teased too bad. Maybe you won't. There won't be any veiled threats about your job or threaten like that. But if you start putting a lot of public articles and comments out there, if you work at a main Wall Street firm, I have other contacts who have worked at Wall Street firms as investment analysts and stuff like that. And, they were basically told that they weren't going to get promoted, they would be let go, that they would be career sabotage if they kept bringing up this Austrian School nonsense and talking about how good gold and silver were. So, in the mainstream Wall Street finance where Keynesian economics is just, it's so important, I guess, because, I guess Wall Street lives off selling paper and asset bubbles, that, Austrian School of Economics is trying to be rational and take away the Kool-Aid.
Right. Yeah. Doom and gloom doesn't sell well on Wall Street. And let's face it, I mean, doom and gloom hasn't done all that well here in the last couple of years. I mean, the Keynesians can thump their chests right now and say, hey, we were right. And our president is saying that he saved us from the worst depression since the Great Depression or even before, and nobody wants to argue with him. We would contend that this recession hasn't even been solved yet. They haven't even fixed the thing, but of course they've declared victory and gone home, so to speak. But yeah, it's not a terribly great for the young people out there that are listening. It's not necessarily the best career move to come out as an Austrian on your first day. So try to find some friends and get a coffee group together or a cocktail group together and talk about it there. But and Austrians have, they've never claimed to be able to time these things. That's probably the other issue, is that if you follow Keynesianism and you follow the money right now, it's certainly been to your benefit in the last few years. So.
Well, Keynesians can't time anything either. I mean, most of the guys got wiped out in 2008, right? But they needed a bailout. So, I mean, the Keynesians, their models, most of the ones that are making aggregate demand models, with variable at risk and all these other aggregate demand models, to try to model the economy with all the different variables and weightings and things like that with statistical models. These models, most of them, I've seen some of them, they're just not very good. There's really no one out there who can accurately model the economy with any type of consistency.
Well, Hayek said that in his 1974 Nobel Prize-winning speech. I mean, that there's no group of people or no person who can model the economy, and it's the fatal conceit to believe that you can, and that's why we're in the mess that we're in.
Yeah, I agree. Now, speaking of Hayek, he rose to prominence. He was actually recognized by the mainstream for his work, and his work was based off Mises's work, because Mises was his Yoda, I guess, to a certain extent. Why didn't the stagflation of the 1970s kill Keynesian economics, in your opinion?
Well, I think it killed it briefly, but unfortunately, the thing that Keynesianism has going for it is that it provides a theory for government policymakers and central bankers to manipulate the economy, whereas the Austrian School doesn't provide that rationalization. So. And politicians and central bankers want to mess with the economy, and the Keynesian school gives them that rationale. I mean, when you consider the birth of stagflation was really during the Nixon era with Arthur Burns, who was the head of the Federal Reserve at the time. And Arthur Burns got that job because he was very close to Nixon when Nixon was vice president under Eisenhower. So Arthur Burns used to be somewhat of a free market thinker when he was in college, and then he got on the job at running the Fed, and he suddenly found Keynesian religion, if you will.
It sounds like almost kind of Greenspan's background.
I didn't know. Very similar to Greenspan. In fact, there's some ties there. And strangely enough, Arthur Burns had some ties to, he was very close with Milton Friedman. And Milton Friedman said that in print that Arthur Burns was the most qualified Fed chairman that ever was. Finally, they were going to have somebody on the job who understood money and business cycles and so on. Well, Arthur Burns was he was a suck-up. He was a political mover and shaker, just like Greenspan was. He was a ladies' man. He liked to get out on the town, and he really liked to be in the know, and he wanted to make his president happy. And so when Nixon told him, listen, we need money to win re-election, we need looser money, he did it, and he essentially created stagflation. Ever since Arthur Burns, with only one exception, and I forgot the gentleman's name who followed him, but then ever since that time, we've had PhD economists running the Fed. Before Arthur Burns, it was typically bankers, and nobody knew their names. They weren't famous. They weren't on the cover of Newsweek or Time or anything else. They were just they were bankers who saw the central bank as a tool to provide liquidity when the crops were in the ground, and when the crops were sold, the money would be paid down, and so on and so forth. And they weren't social engineers like central bankers are today. And that really started all with Arthur Burns. Arthur Burns also has a tie with Murray Rothbard. Believe it or not, he was at Columbia, and he stood in the way of Murray Rothbard getting his doctorate. It took.
Well, I'm not surprised, Doug, that the Ivy League doesn't like the Austrian School.
Right,
Just say,
and
so.
it was a break that Arthur Burns was called to Washington, because then Murray could get his doctorate. So it's a small world we live in sometimes, and it's amazing that all these characters are kind of drawn together. But that's when stagflation started. After Arthur Burns left, he, of course, blamed stagflation on everything else. It wasn't the money he created. Irrational speculators, and it was the usual crowd that's whose fault it was. It didn't have anything to do with wrong-headed policies at the central bank. And so I think these guys, and most of the public doesn't understand the Fed. They don't think about the Fed. They're not trolling the internet or at the time trolling through the papers looking to see what the Fed's doing. They don't care. They're worried about the money in their pocket and making their rent and having a couple beers on Friday night and it doesn't go much further than that. So these guys can tell whatever story they want, and if it works for politicians, then away they go.
Yeah, I think the central bankers, these Keynesian central planners, Doug, have turned into very politicians. I guess the Fed tries to pretend it's independent from politicians and the bureaucracy and the D.C. crowd, but it's really not. I mean, they're pulling political moves. There's over 10 years of proof that the Federal Reserve, wanted higher asset prices. There's lots of academic papers out there that the Federal Reserve paid for research papers and other stuff, from Greenspan to Bernanke to Janet Yellen. Even Janet Yellen, as soon as she took over, talked about the benefits of the wealth effect, and now she's backtracking, saying, we never wanted higher stock prices. So, I mean, the Austrian theory of the business cycle is that the central banks, provide enormous credit bubbles, but we're not seeing a lot of that money necessarily go into the real economy right now, although, we are seeing subprime car loans. We're seeing people who shouldn't get mortgages. We're seeing student loans given out where students can never possibly pay them back. But we're seeing the majority of that money that's been printed, I think it's gone into printing up asset prices. And the Keynesians, the Wall Street people, maybe it's just hopium or whatever, or they're making so much money in commissions off this, the status quo, and their large salaries, they just don't see any of this asset price inflation as evidence of inflation. And then when we do have the bust, and eventually at some point, that's one thing great point you brought up about the Austrian School, that we are going to eventually have to have a bust at some point. My biggest fear is they're going to blame the free market, they're going to blame capitalism and the private sector for all of this stuff. And then they're going to make it even harder to do business, more rules, more regulation, more taxes, etc.
Yeah, no question. I don't think we still hear this over and over about the housing crisis and how it was a lack of regulation that caused that housing bubble. And I try to tell everybody I meet, and I'm currently teaching a class at Georgia Military College, and I tell my students, do not believe the idea that there was a lack of regulation. Bankers get regulated. If you work at a big bank, the regulators actually have an office in your building. Even if you work at a small bank, they show up every 6 months. There is no lack of regulation. But the fact is that they won't let these banks fail. And if you're not going to let them fail, if you're going to let these zombies operate, they're going to continue to do the same thing, juiced up by a Fed the Fed has gone from $800 billion in its footings to $4.5 trillion. It's finally started to level off because they've somewhat tapered the QE nonsense for the moment. But who knows how long they'll do that if the job numbers are weak or, they keep moving that target. I mean, they had said they were going to stop this when they got to 5.5% unemployment rate. Now they're at 5.4 or 5.3 or whatever it is, and somehow they don't see any inflation, so they want to keep doing what they're doing. I think I think they basically know that things are on Main Street are very weak, while things in Washington and on Wall Street are very strong. And I think they know that if they pull the rug out from under these interest rates and let them flow upwards, people are going to be stunned at what the principal hit to a bond will be when say you have a 2% coupon and it goes to a 4% coupon. People will be stunned to see what that does to the principal amount of a bond, and the leverage against those bonds and the ripple effect from it will be enormous.
Yeah, I think the people in power, Doug, in the United States, in Japan, in Europe, in the United Kingdom or England, and also now in China, they're starting to, and China just announced, or is close to announcing, that they're about to do their own version of quantitative easing. They're going to do a bond buying program because they have a lot of municipal debt defaults potentially. So they're going to order their state-owned banks to start buying up those debts to extend the length of the debts and reduce the interest rates paid. So that's, financial repression too. All these governments want to do financial repression. They want to maintain the status quo. They want to keep the game going with asset bubbles. And, there's going to be really bad ramifications down the road. I think if I could get inside the mind of the central banker and get them to be honest with themselves, actually off the record, honest, because I don't think they would ever admit this publicly, but I think they would rather basically destroy all of their own currencies and just have the asset prices rise than let the interest rates rise. I think they're that committed to the policies that they have where, they would rather basically, they see inflation as good as long as it's in asset prices, and, they move the goalposts, I guess, keep changing the formulas with the CPI and the unemployment rate. I think now they're counting, they have the birth-death model for unemployment and jobs report, and they're counting part-time jobs as full-time jobs now. So just the desperation and the rules changes, it's just head-scratching.
Well, it is, and it's interesting. The fact of the matter is when we complain about the U.S. dollar and what the Fed's trying to do with it, and look at the strength of the dollar up until recently has been amazing, and that is because what's going on in the rest of the world is even more amazing. And China, how many videos do we have to see of vacant cities? China has operated this shell game amongst their banks for years, literally for years, where they just rack up. This isn't some new form of, a better brand of capitalism. This is the Politburo, instructing their banks to make loans to friends of the government. Those loans go bad. They put them in a bad bank, operate the bad bank, then the bank gets to go on and make more bad loans, and then they shift those bad loans into another bad bank. I mean, they've been doing this for decades, and I guess the alternative is worse over there. If you've got a billion people who might charge the gates and start a revolution, I guess. I mean, even when they tried to lower the price. The state tried to lower the price of condos. They had demonstrations. So,
well, the average middle class Chinese person still can't afford a condo, even if the price is lowered a little bit. I think the condos are 50, 100 times income. So it's just
they're right. Yeah. The average Chinese person makes $2 a day or whatever it is, $2 a day, $2 a week, and these condos go for $50,000 US or whatever it is. So. But again, we're supposed to believe that Chinese GDP is growing at 7% or 8% or 9% or whatever silly number it is, and again, this stuff is just fabricated. It's either fabricated on paper or it's fabricated in brick and mortar by building cities that have no reason to exist.
Yeah, I agree. They've done central planning and misallocation of capital on a scale pretty much the world has never seen before. But it's not just China using bad GDP numbers. I mean, every country's cheating. Japan, we get tweets from people, our listeners in Japan, and they show us, that their food portions have drastically decreased. They're showing us pictures of, beer cans, how the price stays the same in yen, and the size of the beer can drops. And then we've heard portion sizes at grocery stores and restaurants. So I mean, it's every government that's like trying to make the economy look a lot better than it is. And I think that's because, every Keynesians, the politicians are scared that if they're honest, and Ron Paul, if someone came out and acted like Ron Paul and tried to get reelected, they probably would never get reelected in the U.S.'s political system. So we're just, I guess, victims of bad central planning.
Well, we're supposed to be, Japan's supposed to be having a deflationary spiral. And it sounds like your listeners are proving just exactly the opposite. I mean, if they're making portions smaller and keeping the prices the same, that is the definition of inflation.
I think Japan has stagflation. I think pretty much every country on the entire planet is in one degree or another of stagflation, whether or not they're honest. Japan had asset price deflation. The asset prices deflated. That's not the Austrian School definition. The asset prices were in a bubble from the 70s and 80s. They got way ahead of themselves. They crashed, and Japan tried to prop up the asset prices. They didn't fix the banks. So they consider that deflation, but the CPI in Japan has never crashed. So they haven't had this awful deflation that everyone claims they had. It's just been really in asset prices. The prices in Japan, to live there, it's a very expensive area to live. It's not cheap. Mm-hmm. Moving on, speaking of bad central planning, we've just seen evidence of two things here in the United States and the East Coast recently. The Amtrak accident with Amtrak, and then the Baltimore riots with, the Baltimore City. Or at least I think these are symptoms of central planning and bad economic planning. Do you think then that if Amtrak was sold to a private sector company and they were allowed to invest capital and fix the trains, do you think then that the United States would drastically its infrastructure could be solved that way, maybe across the board?
Yeah, no, I think there's no question. I mean, we have a problem certainly with our infrastructure in this country, and the left and the right, I suppose, to some degree, complain about it all the time. However, they think that somehow a government monopoly over these things is the only way that they can operate. And so what you end up with an Amtrak or any sort of transportation service or government operation is you're probably paying 2 or 3 generations of retirement payments, and you can't fix tracks and you can't fix potholes in the street. And this is only going to get worse when they allow, the numbers just don't work. Whether it's a fireman or policeman or the guy driving the train at 106 miles an hour into the curb, if they can retire at full benefits at age 50 or after 30 years on the job or such and such, and so they get to retire for the rest of their life at full benefits and full pay, and then you have to hire another engineer, cop, or fireman, so on and so forth. You end up hiring 3 to have 1 on the job. And there isn't any business in the world, and certainly no government in the world, that can operate this way. So we've got an infrastructure that's crumbling, and it's really, I think you can point to, there's a piece in the Wall Street Journal today about Illinois bonds going to junk bonds, and it's, their teachers are retiring at $70-some thousand a year, and you can't pay 2 or 3 teachers to have 1 in the classroom and pay the 2 that are retired $70,000 a year and operate. You're just going to go broke. And if you don't go broke, if you maintain your monopoly, something's got to give. And what's going to give in the Amtrak case is the track or whatever infrastructure was involved. And in the case of streets and city operations, is you're going to have fewer cops on the beat, or you're going to have crumbling bridges or potholes or whatever it may be. So yeah, I think we're seeing this all over the country, and you're going to see more municipal bond defaults. Poor Meredith Whitney, I mean, just got a little got out in front of her skis a little bit, I think, a couple of years ago on 60 Minutes, but I think ultimately she'll be proved right. But you know, you're not only are you going to see defaults, you're going to see some civil unrest and some accidents along the way.
Yeah, we saw right after the Amtrak accident, we saw Mother Jones, which is a Democratic, slanted website and, a print Democratic slanted website, immediately blame the Republicans for cutting the budget. But, 5 years from now, when Amtrak is still a disaster, and by the way, it seems like with Amtrak lately, there's a major accident every couple years, and almost all the people I know who have taken Amtrak, they hate it. The service is bad, the food's bad, the seats are not good, there's not good internet on there. There's all these complaints. The private sector, Doug, would solve all these things very rapidly. It would do it efficiently. Why does the government need to run trains? I mean, it just seems like right out of Atlas Shrugged, where it's a really bad accident waiting to happen, and we just got one, and, I see, unfortunately, a lot more accidents down the line. And even Baltimore, the riots in Baltimore, it was predictable with bad government and bad central planning that the taxes were just so high in Baltimore. There's no Fortune 500 company with a corporate headquarters in Baltimore because the taxes were too high. The workforce, a lot of it wasn't skilled enough. The infrastructure in Baltimore, due to many decades of central planning, really since the 50s and 60s, has been so bad. I've driven through Baltimore many times. I've been up there. And, the city, part of it's rebuilding, but so much of it is just old and decrepit, lots of boarded houses, 3-foot potholes in the road, really old lights, dangerous streets. It's just not really, and, the government, it just seems like every time, Doug, that one of these issues with whether it's Amtrak accidents or Baltimore and stuff, people just say, if we give the government more resources and more time and more money, we could solve all these things. But then 5-10 years later, the same things happen, and it's only worse, and we're going to see it repeat again, with the Amtrak accidents and things like that, I think, unfortunately, down the road.
Well, I don't think this was just the latest Amtrak accident. I can remember a couple more that weren't too long ago. But, when we talk about Baltimore, this was ground zero to wage this drug war, and that has given, police departments all over the country carte blanche to it's called qualified immunity, and that is essentially giving cops the benefit of the doubt whenever they do something questionable, all with the idea of stopping this drug war that is so idiotic, has filled our prisons beyond anything else on earth by many magnitudes. And that is the only source of income. That's the only business that's going on in, the struggling parts of Baltimore. So no wonder, young people are
the taxes
surviving,
are also,
you can't open a small business because the taxes are too high, or the red tape at City Hall is too great. So what are you going to do? You're going to supply a demand that's on the street each and every day, and try to dodge the cops that are out there trying to snag the low hanging fruit, the guys that are going to be dependent on some worthless public defender to try to defend them. So the cops they're going to get their numbers up, and they're going to get the number of scalps they need to get to keep their badge and keep their pension and stay on the job. And oh, by the way, when they have a riot, did the police protect any property? No, they stood there in a line with the shields around them, watched people burn cars, burn liquor stores. Whatever happened to protect and serve? They're policing for profit. They're not protecting and serving anymore. This is what central government gives you.
Yeah, and then that's going to give them an excuse then to militarize the police even more with larger weapons, and I heard the Baltimore police is planning on hiring a lot more people, so they're going to increase the amounts of police officers. They're going to have they're going to be weaponized with a lot more weapons and stuff like that. They're turning into stormtroopers and a police state. So it's almost like they kind of wanted this to show up on TV so they can get more resources in order to, increase the stuff. It's just one negative feedback loop, Doug. I mean, I think a lot of this and problems in Baltimore would be solved. It's kind of a microcosm for the United States because there's other cities that have gone through these problems. But, if the taxes were lower, like you said, and there was more economic opportunity, the people wouldn't be selling drugs. They wouldn't be rioting in the streets. They would have a good job and they would have a chance for upward mobility. That's what capitalism and free markets provide. And yet, we're not seeing that in Baltimore right now, unfortunately.
Well, what capitalism and free markets provide, what that benefits the most, the people that are benefited most are the people at the bottom. And when government erects these barriers to entry, it only protects, existing, whether they be Wall Street firms or big firms or whatever they are, keeps competitors away from their doorstep. And they're not protecting, they do it under the idea that they're protecting people's safety, this idea that Uber can't operate because, Uber drivers, haven't been checked out as thoroughly as a taxi cab driver. Now I've used both, and believe me, I'd much rather compared to the characters that I've ridden around with in a cab, I would much rather have an Uber driver.
And the cabs are dirty too.
Oh,
and sometimes you call a cab. I had a New Year's incident in Orlando. I called for a cab on New Year's Eve when I lived in Orlando briefly for a year, and I called for a cab 2 or 3 hours ahead of time at like 7:30, 8 o'clock. And I wanted my cab, at like 8:30 to drop me off where I was going to go to a party that I bought a ticket to for $100 on New Year's Eve. And the cab never showed up. And so I was stuck at home. It was but this is just really bad. And that was I didn't understand. I wasn't libertarian then, didn't know free markets. This is what happens in an inefficient, centrally planned, where the government picks out, 1 or 2 winners and gives them a license and lets them basically do what they want.
Yeah, and we see it up and down the economic spectrum. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of girls in Baltimore who can braid hair, but can they go get but they'd have to go to barber school and get a license, and do they have the money to do all that? No. So the barbers protect themselves by this licensing, and it just goes on and on and on. We can name all kinds of instances where this is the case, and it keeps essentially keeping people on a reservation. And so what are they going to do? They're going to turn to escape either with booze or pills or drugs or whatever they need to do to survive. And there'll be people to take advantage of that. And again, the government's hands are not clean in this situation. They're not only are keeping them there, but they're sending stormtroopers in there to enforce these edicts. And again, I would contend that they're hitting their quotas for jail cells. They're not going to the rich part of town where people might be able to hire lawyers or people might be filming them on their cell phones. No, they're going to dark alleys in the bad part of town to get people, like I say, the low-hanging fruit to fill their jail cells with.
Yeah, and I feel sorry for a lot of the poor minorities, which are most of them happen to be African Americans. But I mean, they need to focus on the long term for themselves. There's the internet out there. They need to focus on education. Crime and rioting. Maybe they'll feel a little bit better about it. But the best way for them to pull themselves out of their situation is by adding skills and adding education. And they don't have to go to college anymore to get a good education. They can get. There's so many avenues now with the internet and libraries and things like that. But, it's easier said than done, and that's a long-term approach, and most people don't focus on the long-term anymore.
No, they don't. I mean, it's kind of Hoppe's book, Democracy, the God That Failed, that democracy is, increased everyone's time preference, if you will, and everybody's more short-term oriented. Thus, the explosion of payday loans and payday lenders and that kind of thing. And a lot of people want to turn this into a race issue, but if they were down here in Alabama, every once in a while in the paper, you would see, the the local police will go out into the hinterland and bust a meth lab, and you will see, a dozen white faces on the front page of the paper who are cooking up some methamphetamine. So I think it's more of a class issue than it is a race issue. But again, it's the government is certainly not doing anything to help matters.
Yeah, I agree. There's poor people everywhere, and it's mostly the government's fault in this two-party system of corrupt Republicans and corrupt Democrats, and they're just trying to divide us and not tell us the truth, or maybe once in a while they'll tell us the truth, but it's mostly lies. I want to get your opinion on Hillary Clinton scandals. We've seen stories of so many corrupt politicians. I don't know about you, but it seems like the stories about all these corrupt politicians are coming out more and more now than in the past. From a historical perspective, Warren G. Harding, the Teapot Dome scandal of the 1920s, because he was the president during the last Austrian School depression where it was short and the free market was allowed to correct itself. He had a small scandal. It was just one unbidded contractor, a couple from an oil and gas lease. Today that would be laughed at. I mean, that happens every day now at all levels of government, that type of scandal, and no one even bats an eye. We have all these scandals in place. What do you think is causing all the corruption and scandals? Is it central banking and fiat money?
You could throw that in, but I think it's the explosion of laws. There used to be one federal crime, and that was treason. Now you have 4,800 on the books, and most judges will tell you that they're so broad that they can't even tell you whether you've committed a crime or not. And so when you have that many crimes on the books, it just makes the whole environment ripe for corruption. And when you don't have a lot of laws on the books, then the opportunities for corruption are just not that great. So now we have more laws. Of course, we have a lot of, as you mentioned, we have a lot of loose money rolling around. And so politicians want to get their hands on it. Hillary, Hillary and Bill, I assume, are fairly good at this. And I assume they're going to, get a slide off the hook and nobody's going to really care much. It's kind of like I lived in Vegas for 20 some years, and Harry Reid was able to keep his nose relatively clean while most everybody in town knew that he had his fingers in various land deals whenever a new highway was announced or whatever the case may be. He just conveniently owned some property next door, so on and so forth. Meanwhile, out there, when I lived there, during a certain period of time, 5 out of the 6 county commissioners, and believe me, Clark County commissioners are probably the most powerful people in Nevada because they control what goes on the Las Vegas Strip. So 5 out of 6 went to prison. That means they weren't very good at this. They got caught, through wiretaps and various things. Harry is smart enough. Looks like he's going to live out his entire political career without getting anything on him. I assume that Hillary and Bill will probably accomplish the same thing. But again, I would point to, in addition to all the money that's been created and is thus worthy of chasing, but there are so many laws to ensnare people in, and therefore you're going to have lots of corruption because you can pay people to look the other way or pass out favors.
Yeah, there's so many laws now on the books. It's just becoming almost impossible to keep up with. I mean, because even with the tax laws, most tax attorneys and tax accountants, they're struggling to keep up with all the tax loopholes because of how big the tax code has gotten. Everything has gotten so complex. I think there's a book out there, I'm not sure if it's written by a libertarian or not, but I think it says that basically everyone unknowingly basically commits at least 3 felonies a day and doesn't even realize it here in the United States. So things are just, I guess, becoming immoral and corrupt and complex that, it's becoming very difficult to do business honestly and hardworking the right way and to succeed in life, upward advancement in your job or anything, it's just becoming difficult to do even a couple decades ago what used to be a lot easier, in my opinion.
Yeah, no question about it. The name of the book actually is 3 Felonies a Day, and it's not just anybody, but it's anybody who owns a business or has a position of authority within a company. It's very possible that they can commit three felonies a day, because they can make decisions that can ensnare them in these federal laws that again, nobody can, figure out what they are, where they are. So there's a series of tripwires out there that, it's like when a cop pulls up behind you. Do you feel safe? Oh, I got a cop right there. I've got protection. You're
I get nervous.
You get nervous.
I turn, make a right to the next street, let him pass by. I want the cop in front of me. I want him right in front of me so I can see where he is. I don't want him behind me, tailing me.
Exactly, because you don't know if you have a tail light out. You don't know if you signaled when you made your turn. You don't know, and there's just this variety of things. And they've got a computer in their car. They can run down. I mean, if you didn't pay this, or you got outstanding parking tickets or whatever, or he's just bored and wants to mess with you. So when you have a country that's overgrown with laws and legislations like we have, we're just open. It's open season for harassment, and people in power. Doug Casey says this a lot. Sociopaths are attracted to government positions, both on the low end and certainly on the high end. I've written quite a bit on why sociopaths make it to the top, and Hayek had a chapter about that in Road to Serfdom. They understand how to appeal to the lowest basis level, and these are people with little conscience, and the ends always justify the means, and that's who's attracted to that sort of power. So yeah, it's really turned into. I'm not saying there isn't good people out there here and there. I mean, everybody, you could quickly throw Ron Paul's name at me, and I know Ron and he's great and all that.
They're an exception to the rule, though. They're not the rule.
But it's just the reason we are so attracted to Ron Paul is that he is so very unusual, and no, it's a tough world out there, and getting tougher as government continues to expand. Just in my lifetime, it's just been incredible how much the state has expanded. It's almost expanded at the rate the money supply has, and and some people might say, well, who cares if the money supply has grown? And then I might say, well, okay, why isn't a foot then 13 inches or 14 inches? Why isn't a foot now 20 inches? What happened to our measuring stick here? So it makes you wonder about record profits on Wall Street when all this money is created and gets sloshed around at the top. Are they really making profits, or is this just an illusion?
They're not making profits. I mean, they're not growing their revenues. They're not creating new products and services for the most part. They're taking cheap debt and they're buying back shares with declining revenues so they can make the denominator, which is the earnings. They can make the earnings look good even without growing revenues. So I mean, and plus they're using super aggressive accounting because they can hire the most expensive accountants money can buy that the average small business owner can't afford. So it's the small business owner who's getting screwed. It just really disgusts me, Doug, the amount of corruption that we're seeing, whether it's John Corzine, who stole your banker. He was running, a firm, a commodities firm that also managed money, and he stole his client's money. And then because he managed the campaign contributions for, I think, Clinton and also Obama, that, he was basically given a free pass, and he may even be able to manage money in a hedge fund. It disgusts me that the two front runners, it seems, for the political election for the president are a Bush and a Clinton. Bailouts, bail-ins, potentials that, and all these rules changes and rules increases. There's just so much corruption and graft and lack of morals right now in the society in the United States, and to a certain extent, it's spread out to the United States. I mean, the U.S. used to not be known, I think, as a corrupt country, or not nearly as much as now, and things have changed drastically over the decades.
Yeah, no question about it. I think that, and of course we hear this drumbeat by various cable channels, one in particular, of how, how great the U.S. is. We've got this military worship. We've got this since 9/11. We worship firemen. We worship cops. They can do no wrong. The government's here to protect us, and thank goodness. And that's because the rest of the world wants to. If they were allowed, they would come over and slit all of our throats in the middle of the night, and which is ridiculous. The first thing I tell young people is get a passport and go overseas. You are going to find out that you're going to see much less police presence. It's going to be much tamer, much calmer. You're not going to see cameras on every intersection, and it is not that dangerous place that everybody says, or at least some people in our society say the rest of the world is. That we have to pay to police. This great thing we call democracy is such a great thing that we have to export it, and even when it's not wanted.
Well, democracy, Doug, a pure democracy, right? Doesn't it? It's tyranny of the majority, right? Doesn't it redistribute wealth because people can vote themselves free things? So a free market which defends private property, a pure democracy and free markets and capitalism, it can't coexist for very long, right? In a pure democracy standpoint, where people don't have to work very hard and don't have any private property, they can vote themselves all these freebies with politicians promising redistribution.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they tend to get lumped together. They want to lump democracy and capitalism together, and the two don't necessarily coexist very well. It's like, to quote Doug Casey again, I mean, democracy is tyranny in a sport code, I think he called it, and that's. I tell people I wish we were still reporting to the Crown. I think they would be more likely. The old lady would probably be leaving us alone more than my neighbors on city council that want to tell me what to do with my yard or whatever the case may be. We've just got too many busybodies in this society. We've got helicopter parenting. We've got helicopter governing. And people need to just mind their own business and get out of the way and let people make products and services that are going to make our lives better. Thank goodness for technology, and thank goodness for people who don't sit around and complain about it like I do, but actually do something about it and make a product that, make an Uber or whatever it might be that is going to disrupt things. I thank goodness for these people because they are making our lives better despite what the government's trying to do.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's a dirty little secret, I think. I'm not sure if there's any statistical data proving this, but I live right outside of D.C. where there's a lot of government employees and a lot of teachers, and the average annual salaries for a lot of teachers and the government employees is actually much higher than the average private sector employee. Most private sector employees around here, Doug, they're lucky if they make $30,000 or $40,000 a year base pay. They do any little thing wrong, they're fired the next day or the next week. Maybe they're given one warning if they're lucky. It's tough for them to get vacations and things like that. Government employees around here, they have a couple degrees, they get the right government job, they can make easily 65, 70, some of them even make six figures. And, I know I've heard stories from friends who either know government employees have done this, where they can show up to work at 11 a.m., a lot of them, and they can't get fired. They can show up to work drunk, they can show up to work at 11 a.m., they can't get fired. So, due to union protection or whatever, and then they get automatic small salary increases and other perks. We're seeing these scandals with government agency people where government credit cards and government expense accounts were spent on hookers and, private parties and things like that. So it's just really crazy that, big government, most people in the big government say, we can fix things with more regulation and spending more money and more resources and all these things. But, every time they say this, check back 5 years later and they haven't fixed anything. So they've normally only made things worse.
No, they're not fixing anything, and when they want to cut things, They never cut the people you're talking about. When they shut down government, the first thing they do is shut down the national parks and the Statue of Liberty or some tourist attraction there in Washington D.C. to make sure that the soccer moms and their kids are all tearfully upset because they couldn't go on their field trip that day. They don't get rid of any bureaucrats or let them go for a few weeks so that they can't, watch porn on the job or whatever the heck they're doing. They shut down the, things that people want to use. And, it's the equivalent of on a local level if the school systems don't get the tax increase they want, they immediately shut down the, they might stop high school football. That's been threatened. Or advanced classes or music classes or things like that. They don't get rid of any of the bureaucracy. They don't ever think about that because nobody would see it. Nobody would care. They go, oh, great, you can do without those people. We always thought you could. No, they immediately shut down something very visible, something that people want to, that they want to visit or they want to use, and that way they get what they want, and nothing ever changes.
Yeah, people talk. The news cycle is so short now. People talk about a story. Maybe Amtrak or Baltimore will get talked about for another couple of weeks at most, and then it'll move on. And then we'll have maybe another Baltimore type problem in the future, and then another Amtrak accident. Because like we both said, there's been a lot of Amtrak accidents every couple of years, and then nothing properly will get done about it. Where the private sector would have been forced to fix these problems very quickly, or risk losing everything in bankruptcy and lawsuits and all these things.
We would have been hearing about lawsuits forever and ever and ever if these would have been private wrecks. That's exactly right.
Well, my last question or two before I let you go. You wrote an article about the NFL draft. The NFL is a protected league. They've had tax exempt status for a long time. They normally don't let rookies decide where they want to sign unless they're not drafted. What's your opinion on the behavior of the NFL?
Well, the piece that you refer to, and I actually wrote it 3 or 4 years ago, it had somewhat of a resurgence on Twitter over the draft weekend, which I was happy about. But I was actually using the draft as an illustration of specialization and division of labor. There was a gentleman by the name of Joel Boschbaum who was, for people who know Mel Kiper Jr., who specializes in knowing how good all these players are and rating them and so on and so forth. We have a number of guys doing this. Joel Boschbaum was the first one who did it, and it was really because of him that the draft has become this big extravaganza. And Boschbaum, he died when he was 48 years old, and he was 100 pounds, and his mother wouldn't even visit him because his apartment was so messy, and he watched game film 24 hours a day, and all he ate was tuna and drank Diet 7-Up or whatever the case may be. He was a fascinating character, and what I was trying to illustrate was I wasn't trying to. I took some criticism in the libertarian world because it's like, oh, the NFL is this and the NFL is that, but the idea behind the piece was really to talk about Joel and there's kind of a place for everybody if you want to work hard and specialize at it. But I think the NFL, and I'm somebody who played high school football and I played college football, and I'm a big fan. But I think we're seeing probably some sort of peak in the NFL and even possibly even in college. That how long is it going to be before parents say no to their kids who want to play football because of the concussion risk and that kind of thing? I think there's going to be a day where probably we'll probably have some football, but heaven forbid soccer will take over here or something like that. But I hate to see anybody taxed. But the problem is that the NFL owners are not terribly sympathetic characters. They get tax exempt bonds or to finance their stadiums and
kickback scheme. A lot of them, Doug, they don't even put in, a lot of the NFL owners, they don't put in any of their own capital, right, for these new stadiums, and yet the valuations for their teams go up, $100 million or more when the new stadium's built.
Right. No, you're exactly right, and there is all kinds of academic work done that new stadiums do not help local economies.
Crony capitalists.
All they do is they help the owner, they help the ball players, and local business owners are crowded out. There is nothing to this idea. Everybody wants to trot out that Keynesian multiplier effect. If you build a brand new stadium in downtown Baltimore, for instance, and it's just not true. There's not one study. There's not two studies. There's a dozen or 24 studies that have crunched those numbers. And so these guys have, like I say, they've been in the case of college. Good grief. The state pays for the stadium. Ticket buyers pay arm and a leg for the tickets, and they don't have to pay the players. In terms of the pros, you got to pay the players, but the taxpayer pays for stadiums. So I just think over time, and again, I'm a guy who loves to watch football, but there was a day when horse racing and boxing were the two most popular sports in this country, and neither one is barely on the radar these days, especially boxing. That's turned into such a farce. And who knows, 30, 40, 50 years from now, football may just be kind of a memory of this great period of time, and
I like football a lot too. I didn't play it like you, but it's become kind of a bread and circus, to keep people distracted, along with reality TV and
Sure.
and celebrity gossip and many other things like that from the truth about what's really going on.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, it is certainly bread and circus, and the last thing that and if you've gone to a ball game, anybody who's gone to a ball game lately, my gosh, you got to stand up and you've got to put a hand over heart, and then you've got to salute the flag, and they have some jets run over and burn up some taxpayer dollars in jet fuel, and we've got to thank the veterans, and so on and so forth. It's turned into a celebration of the military state. Has gone along with this. Has gone along with football and basketball and the whole bit, and so it's and sports is doing what they have to do to stay close to government, I guess. But it is certainly annoying. It's can we get on with the contest already? I mean, this will be a controversial statement, but we may get to the point next week where we're going to have someone win Dancing with the Stars who can't dance because he only has one arm and one leg. And the guy is certainly likable, and so on and so forth. But he can't dance. But watch this guy win Dancing with the Stars. So
yeah, well, crony capitalism, Doug, has become very popular lately. I mean, there's been a mini scandal with like whether or not the NFL and NFL teams were getting paid by the U.S. military to help promote them, like with advertising and other stuff. But crony cap, even business schools now, a lot of them, Doug, are teaching, one of your main customers should be the government because they're reliable and they're not going anywhere and they're going to get bigger. So you should come up with a business model to sell as much as you can of a product or service to the government. So, I mean, even crony capitalism is being taught now in major business schools as like a viable business model.
Well, I think people who think that they can get a job with the government or have a contract with the government and have no more worries in their life, I think is a big mistake. I think we're going to see governments that, and they're going to go kicking and screaming, but we've seen governments go broke, and before they'll go broke again. And when governments go broke, they can be very, very mean. And it'll be hard to get assets out of the country. They'll be very hard to deal with. So it could be certainly a very difficult time going forward. I would certainly, as a teacher, I don't encourage students to go that direction.
Well, yeah, I agree. It's going to be a lot of hard times going through, but that's why we do the podcast, and that's why I think people should learn Austrian School economics so they have independent thinking and they can kind of see through a lot of the propaganda and bullshit and lies and stuff like that they're being told by whether it's Wall Street or a large corporation or, a specific government agency or something like that independent thinking and education and questioning authority, or politely questioning authority, is always a good thing. I just want to thank you again for your time, Doug. I really enjoyed this. I think the asset markets are in a crack-up boom here. In the real economy, we're not seeing the consumer prices necessarily show hyperinflation, but the asset prices are certainly, whether it's diamonds or artwork, many other assets, we're starting to see evidence of the crack-up boom starting, like von Mises. So hopefully we don't have hyperinflation in the United States. That could potentially destroy society completely, but I think unfortunately big government and central planning have already put society down a really bad path.
I agree, but I urge your listeners: you only have one life to live. Live it as well as you can. Be as smart as you can, as educated as you can. Protect yourself, because you don't get to come back and do this again under better circumstances. So raise your children well. Take care of yourself, and as my old teacher Murray Rothbard, just have fun. I never met a happier guy, and so I try to be happy like Murray was.
Now, do you have a website where your articles are posted?
Gosh,
just go to Mises' website.
I have an archive of articles at Mises.org. I have an archive at Mises.ca, which is Mises Canada. I'm on the board of Mises Canada. And Laissez-faire Books, LFB.org. We'll have a few of my articles. Casey Research probably will have a few. Or just Google my name, and there's a mathematician Douglas French, but you'll stumble onto some of I've got hours and hours of YouTubes of talks I've given, and
on the Mises channel.
You'll find my stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's how I found you. I found you in your articles on Mises and the speeches you gave, or classes, I guess, on the Mises YouTube channel. Well, I really enjoyed our discussion today. I want to thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.